Hello world from Oktopost headquarters. This is Radically Transparent, Oktopost's original show on B2B Marketing Now. I'm your host, Jennifer Gutman, Director of Social Strategy, and on this podcast, we'll feature B2B marketing leaders who will share their radically transparent truths behind being a modern-day marketer and what it takes to grow ideas, take risks, and impact change. Joining me on this episode of Radically Transparent is Claire Kennedy, Manager, Social Media Marketing at Forrester. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to have you. And I know, we've had some interesting conversations prior to our episode, and I'm really looking forward to kind of diving in to your life as social media manager, which I think all of us, right, we all definitely know those shoes well. I'm hoping before we dive in, maybe we could get a little bit radically transparent about your professional journey and how you found yourself at Forrester.
Yeah, so I originally started at Serious Decisions, which Forrester acquired in 2019. And that was the first B2B company that I really worked at. I came from B2C with my first career job out of college. And I remember seeing the listing, not knowing at all what the company did, not understanding B2B, not understanding B2B research. And when it came time to the interviews, I was like, okay, I really got to impress them, because if they ask me about the company, I have nothing. I looked in the website, I still didn't understand it. So I really went like above and beyond. I brought a portfolio on an iPad. I tried to think of, okay, even not knowing anything about the company, looking at their social media profiles, what are ways that I think I can improve it without, offending whoever currently does this job. So I brought in this whole presentation, and then when they were like really impressed and really excited, and they're like, oh, do you have any questions for us? And I was like, does it matter that I have no B2B experience? I was like, I'm really excited. I feel like I can do a good job. I feel like we're really jiving, but I don't know what you guys do. Is that okay? Like, I want to learn, but is that a deterrent? And they're like, absolutely not. None of us knew what this company was when we joined. And I was like, great.
You fit right in.
and it worked out, because my second week at work was B2B Summit. And I was live tweeting stuff I didn't understand, but that was kind of a crash course into B2B marketing, sales, and product, because I was in Vegas and I was like, okay, people are excited. I guess this is exciting. And since then, I've just been such a B2B marketing nerd and gotten so excited about the fact that what we sell is brain share. We sell the brain trust of other people helping people be better. And I've been a B2B nerd ever since.
Wow, that's a great story. And to think about how often, right, we go on interviews and you need to impress, and then to think that you're on an interview and really sweating, during the questions, not really understanding exactly what it is you're about to do. Kudos to you for landing that job. And we're so glad that you did, because we see the social channels and we're watching what's happening over at Forrester, and it's pretty impressive. So strong work there. With that being said, and knowing that you're owning the social channels of Forrester, keep me honest, right? Those are under your control.
Yes, I'm ultimately responsible for all of them. I directly manage North America, but I'm also responsible for training and enabling our EMEA and APAC folks as well.
All right. So you've definitely had quite a year, I'm imagining, with everybody pivoting and, social being at such a forefront for many B2B brands, and leaning on Forrester to get the most updated information, news, research, whatever it may be across social. I'm sure there was not a shortage of things keeping you up at night last year, and I'm hoping you can be able to go forward with sharing with us, there has to be something. Claire, what's keeping you up at night professionally these days?
Yeah, it honestly hit me around mid-year last year, where I suddenly was a lot more focused on community management. This wasn't something that I feel like in B2B research is as big of a deal. People aren't really going on rants about us. People may disagree with our research, but it typically doesn't go towards what retailers deal with, what the service industry deals with. I'm sure Comcast gets slews of hate all day. That's not really something that we see. So I never really had to worry about that from a negative standpoint. But what I realized is, how do I make people care about us enough to want to talk to us and engage with us? I was suddenly realizing that it wasn't that people weren't speaking negatively about us, people weren't speaking to us. So it suddenly hit me that Forrester is a brand that people trust and respect, but on social, we're absent from the conversation. They're having conversations about B2B marketing and research and CX and security and risk, but they weren't including Forrester in that conversation as a kind of brand voice. And I started realizing, like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I've never had to think about this. So I started researching. I talked to a friend at HubSpot who I really admire their social media and how they,
social. I'm with
especially especially their Twitter accounts. And I was like, I kind of did like a pseudo interview, and I'm like, how did you decide the strategy? I feel like I'm an intern again, where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it was really humbling to realize that I had to kind of start over of how I approach social media and how I approached how people see us. And I want them to feel an emotion when they go to our profiles, whether that's confidence in themselves or excitement or trust, but I want them to feel something when they come to us. And that's something that I've kind of been working on and will continue to work on. But it was really that light bulb moment of, how do I make people care about us? And how do I make them want to talk to us in that fun way that social media is, not just to get a sale or to get a lead, which is always good, but how do I make them just engage with us? And that's been a really huge learning journey for me.
I definitely can hop on that learning journey with you. I was actually having the other day an interesting conversation with a colleague of mine about this very topic, and we were exploring and talking about a new term we have heard in the industry called ROE, and this triggered my mind because you were sharing, right? How do you engage and how do you evoke emotions on social media? And where my mind immediately goes as an Oktoposter is, well, great, let's evoke emotions, but then how do you measure it? And I know there's some talk now about this new metric. Maybe it's not so new, but maybe it's being revived, of ROE, right? Return on emotion. And how do you get that emotional positive response in engagement on your social posts? So I can't imagine that it's easy. And kind of thinking through this, in your opinion, right, why should brands and consumers pay attention, right, to social and in general social media management? Why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back on my kind of new or pivoted social strategy for this year is, you can be a great brand that people trust and people love and people respect and rely on. But social media is that continued conversation. So you go back to us on social, you have a happy, positive interaction. I know that even when I posted and another company, even I know it's a social media manager, but a company responds with a little heart, like, we love this. It has a nice feeling to feel seen, especially to feel seen by a brand, even if you're a client. So continuing that conversation and feeling part of this mini kind of micro community. I think especially now people are really aching for some type of engagement, whether it's a Twitter thread or it's a bunch of folks participating in a poll and commenting about it and feeling, again, seen. People, especially executives, want to feel part of a conversation, want to know what other folks are doing. So this idea of using social media to kind of, especially your own brand social media, to be that conversation. Even companies that aren't vendors of ours, I enjoy engaging with on social media because I like their brand voice. I like the way they interact. I like the community they've built. So I feel safe on that channel's page, even though I'm not a client, they know I'm not a client, they still treat me the same they would a client on social media. And I think it's really creating that safe space for executives to just be like, I don't know what to do. I'm joining this kind of pseudo group on social media, especially on Twitter. and just talking with folks and feeling part of a community again, where it used to be maybe an executive roundtable. Now it's kind of happening on Twitter.
I think, yeah, that's a really interesting point to bring up in terms of executives feeling a safe space. I recently had a debate with somebody over at LinkedIn actually around the idea of like LinkedIn groups versus Facebook groups and LinkedIn in general, or sorry, Twitter in general, and we were kind of chatting about this idea of just that, right? Where you have executives or professionals on LinkedIn, and perhaps on LinkedIn itself, maybe professionals don't always feel so vulnerable because that network is like the persona of that network is professional and you want to come across a certain way, but you could essentially be on LinkedIn and then let's say your Twitter or your Facebook, you could go to a different social network and perhaps have a whole different buyer persona or a whole different persona and engage with others and feel more comfortable because you're not on your LinkedIn profile. And it's interesting to me the power that social has over creating those types of conversations and engagements, because again, even in B2B marketing, right? So I know you came from the B2C world where I'm sure Twitter and maybe Facebook were at the forefront, maybe a little less LinkedIn, but now in the B2B world where we rely so heavily on LinkedIn, I think it's also safe to say that we should open our eyes to channels like Twitter and Facebook, because the people that we're selling to or including in our conversations, we want to know about them. And maybe on Facebook, they're sharing different things that's going to help us in getting to know them and build those relationships that when we create posts on LinkedIn, for example, by understanding what they're posting on Facebook and Twitter, we can then even engage more and build those deeper, more meaningful communities. And so what you're saying on community management, it really sparks my attention. We're working on it now at Oktopost. It's not easy, definitely not easy. And
Yeah.
and you had shared a little bit earlier on too that you had to pivot your entire strategy in 2020, which I think anyone listening at this point, no surprise, we all of us are in solidarity. We're all like shaking our heads, like yes, we all pivoted our strategy. I'm really curious, Claire, what was it like, right, to shift an entire strategy on social? Let alone at Forrester, right? Where everybody, I mean, I think when I say Forrester, even myself, I mean, you guys, we know who you are, right? People really trust your brand. No pressure on shifting the strategy. But what on earth went through your head? What was your moment that you knew you needed to shift? And how are you paving the way for authenticity moving forward?
Yeah, so it was interesting because I think anyone working in social media knows their seasons of behavior. It's not necessarily normal summer and winter, but your typical research waves or when you have, over holidays, behavior may dip. So I knew my typical behavior seasons. I knew that the start of the year was typically a ramp up. People are really excited to get started. They have an energy about them and they want to start a new strategy. We saw that in January and February. And especially with our predictions and our planning assumptions, people were really energized to start something new. And then in March, that was that bombshell of, okay, everything may be shutting down. The world's kind of chaos. We don't really know what's going on. And Forrester put out tons of COVID research. Like we were a research machine. So March was a really great month for us. But in terms of engagement, and same thing with April, but it wasn't consistent engagement. It was engagement around just the COVID content. Everything else kind of fluctuated because that wasn't the main point. And even though COVID research wasn't really a marketing priority because we hadn't put that into our plans, so I was kind of struggling on how to keep that momentum. And then I started to see the downward spiral of not seeing consistent engagement, content that would typically like blow engagement out of the water. I was really trying to pull my
Like
my go-to content.
What kind of content for you guys like blows engagement out of the water?
Like a blog by our CEO founder.
There you go.
Like something like that should get, like 15,000 impressions.
Yeah.
And it was getting like half that. And that's kind of when the alarm bells and the anxiety started going off. And I was like, I don't know what's not resonating. And I started to just research how people are feeling and listening to interviews kind of like this from executives to understand like what their mindset was, because I knew I was stressed, especially in America. We were dealing with marches and riots and a bunch of other stuff other than COVID last year. So I knew I was exhausted. I was scheduling breaks to cry at work so that I could just get through the day. So I was like, if I'm doing that as someone that is more junior in my career, I can't imagine what an executive feels like. Like, is an executive also scheduling time in their day to cry? Like, how are they getting through the day? What is their main priority? And I started seeing that people were like, I don't know what to do. A million people are posting that they have a guide and they have this and they have this. And it's almost, there's information overload. There's too much happening. I can't focus. I don't know what to do. Yeah. And that's when I started leaning towards empathy. And I started really being like, how can Forrester showcase empathy? How can me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram say, we see you. We know it's crazy. And I actually think I've had a couple posts like that. We know that your world is insane right now. This is one way that we can make it easier. Here's this guide that helps with this tiny piece. So we really broke it down. Like, we can't solve all your issues, but this post right here can solve this small issue. This is a way that we're here for you. And those are the posts that started to do really well. And same thing with all of the research, security and risk, all of the different topics that we cover. I try to think in the minds of someone that is experiencing chaos for the first time, not just an executive, not someone who is this, buttoned up, really important CTO or CIO or CEO, but someone who for the first time is experiencing chaos and they don't have any preparation for this. They don't know what they're doing. They're just trying to get through the day. And if we could be a moment of solace and a moment of comfort, not just trying to sound like the smartest person in the world, but if we could be comforting and they could feel safe, that's what I started to try and build. And I stopped trying to think about leads. Even though I'm in the demand team, I was very transparent. I was very transparent. Yeah.
Claire, like for a second, like I need to break this down because, you're responsible for like demand gen and social, and we're in the B2B world. And here you're telling me that you are putting, at the moment, you had put leads aside. How did that conversation go with your boss?
I mean, she was new as the demand team. We were kind of a new demand team last year. There was a lot of restructuring done like right before COVID hit. So we were kind of a new team, kind of chugging along. And I told her, nothing's working. Nothing that I know to do is working. I'm trying, I'm pivoting. I'm not posting all of the content I normally would. I'm focusing on 1 or 2 pieces a day. And I'm focusing on trying to make them care and trying to lean in with empathy. And I'm only going to post content that I think does that. So rather than finding a blog, all of our blogs are written by our analysts. So they're all really smart people, but I would go in and read it and be like, is someone who's in chaos going to understand this, going to be able to digest this? So I would go through and I really read every blog, listen to all of our podcasts and find that moment of joy or confidence or something, that emotion that I could pull and put into a tweet or put into a LinkedIn post. So a lot more time was spent in actually content creation, where before I would kind of lean on like, we're smart. People will just know that we're smart. And now I was really thinking, but how can I make them feel confidence in themselves? Not just we're the best, have confidence in us, but how do I make people read our content, read our social page and feel confidence in themselves? And that was a huge shift for me. And I basically told my manager, like, I don't know if it's going to work, but nothing else is working. So I need to try. And it ended up being great because I was able to show in data that empathy was working over other tones of voice.
Wow.
And it's something that's a bigger point for our marketing strategy in general, where we're trying to speak to the person, not just the buyer or the persona. But it's really enabled me to do things like polls and add emojis and reply to people with hearts and understand that they're human beings still now in year 2 of just exhaustion.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm thinking about too, is that last year was chaos. This year is exhaustion. People are trying to have hope and have excitement, but we know it's still a long way off.
Yeah.
So trying to also cut to the chase. What am I trying to get out of this interaction? And having some posts that are just engagement, that don't link to anything else, that are just engagement, because some people in that moment sometimes don't want to read. And so I'm trying to acknowledge that as well.
I love that. And I have two questions on this topic, and then we're going to move to the next question, because the two questions that I have, one, about how much time, right? Because social doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you woke up and like, okay, it's not working. Hey, manager, let's go and just, change all these tweets tomorrow and we're going to see an upward trend. At what point did you start to see the fruits of what you were building starting to work or pay off? Or how much time did that take to start to see?
Yeah, so it was well, some of our posts, especially around CX, that I really leaned into the empathy of the analyst who wrote it as well. A lot of our analyst tones started to change around their own research. So I was able to kind of pull from that.
Okay.
Because again, rather than trying to say, this is what you should be doing, they would kind of start with, we know everything is insane. We know that no one was prepared for this. Here's what we recommend for this specific problem versus, all of your issues as a whole. But it was really me kind of, I would give everything about a week.
Okay.
Because I was trying new stuff. Yeah. I recognized that people weren't on our page every day, especially again in the US. A lot of other things were happening. There was a lot of weeks or months where we were almost absent because we were not the most important voice that was happening. And that was also something that was a big learning curve last year. Usually you have a crisis team for like one event. Yeah. We had it for multiple, and for months on end. I would kind of wake up in like fear most of the summer, just waiting for like another shoe to drop. So trying to pace out content and give it room to breathe and not put expectations on it. And when I started using polls a lot more intuitively, so not just which content are you excited for at this event, but what is your biggest fear right now? What is your biggest challenge? What is, something like, if you had all the time in the world and all the money in the world and all the budget in the world, what is something that you would change right now about your department or about your processes? And just seeing people be vulnerable, especially on LinkedIn, because you can see who voted. I don't know if everyone knows that. Surprise if you don't. But we can see, and I always love clicking on that and seeing that it's like executives, presidents, CEOs clicking that they're fearful of things. And I think it's really they're being vulnerable and honest. And I wanted to kind of give space for that and give room for people to interact with us for the first time that way. So it was really over a couple of months where I was like, my benchmarks were kind of out the window. I didn't know what was good engagement anymore, but any engagement that we got that was new. So participating in a poll, someone replying, someone quote tweeting versus just retweeting, those are the metrics that I look for now. I want, and this is something that my friend from HubSpot told me, she's like, we want people to come back. We want reoccurring engagement, not just those fan favorites that you see in your notifications all the time, but new people and groups of people that continue to engage and create engagement that's meaningful, like quote tweeting, replying, not just liking, retweeting, which is kind of passive, but people that are so inspired by your content that they want to put their voice in it as well. And so that's what I started to look for: replies, quote tweets, people engaging with us in a very intentional way versus just kind of scrolling through and liking. So I just got excited by any poll that got above like 10 votes. I would screenshot it and I'd be like, Lucy, it's working. People want to interact with us, and it would get me really, really excited. That it wasn't that they didn't want to talk to us, is that we weren't talking to them to begin with. So now this is a conversation.
Yeah, it's such a valid point, right? Brands need to be not a megaphone, but really intentional and kind of, we need to build our tribes, first of all, but we also need to let our tribes, do the talking and be engaging with us and engage with them. It's not a one-way street. And I have to say, just hearing what you're sharing, I love your mindset. I mean, the past few kind of stories you've shared, I think what I keep hearing is like research and engage. Like you really took the time, even in the world of chaos, right? Even in the world of craziness, trying to like research and truly understand, right? Not just kind of throwing curveballs, but really taking the time to research and then engage and follow through. I mean, we all learn from one another. And I think what I'm taking away from this episode is the power of research and engage. And you've taught me that on this show. Like I can't even put into words how much I admire that, because so many of us, I think, start to panic when we see our numbers dipping and then panicking on how we're going to prove ROI. And instead of taking a breath and taking a moment, really researching, engaging, I love that you called your friend over at HubSpot, right? To show that really all of us can learn from one another. I think what I'm curious, so I know your friend over at HubSpot shared some things, and I'm hoping that, just so we can learn so much more. Can you share or walk us through maybe some of your social media plan for 2021? I know you said something about the theme being exhaustion, or like we're moving from chaos to exhaustion, but what does 2021 look like for you guys?
Yeah, so I'm really focusing again on that conversation. So it's really easy, I think, especially for us to default to, oh, marketers want to have conversations. Sales folks are too busy. But that's not true, because I see sales leaders on LinkedIn having engaging conversations, making videos, taking time out of their day to educate.
Yeah.
So I need to get better at speaking to that audience. And same thing with CX leaders. That's something that, I mean, is still a new function and a new role. So it's not as easy as, hey, CX leaders, hey, CX managers. Sometimes it's the digital marketing manager that's also running CX, or someone in sales also running CX. So thinking of the topic area and not just the persona on social, because I can't target an organic. I can kind of pseudo target on LinkedIn, but not on Twitter. Anyone can scroll by. So making sure that it's, again, that emotion that we're trying to get out of, making them feel confident in an action or in something they're doing versus just assuming they're a leader or a director of CX. And again, that I'm always coming back to is like, why should they care? And that's something I bring up in brand meetings and bring up in demand meetings. And like,
why should I care? And everyone's going to be walking around. We're going to know Claire. We listened to Claire's podcast because we're wearing the swag. Why should I care? I love it.
And it kind of goes off of Forrester has kind of a saying of like what it means. Like, this is what it means for you. And I kind of brought that as kind of a step further into social, where it's like, why should they care about us? There's so much noise in organic. We can kind of target on LinkedIn, but not really. And there's so much noise. There's so much research out there that to the untrained eye looks the same. How do I get them to care about us? And how do I get them to continue to care and build a relationship where they keep coming back? Not just, oh, I found this great ebook. Great, bye. like we all probably do in our research. I want them to come back, even if they're not a client right away, even if they're not a lead right away. Yeah. I want to create a community where people feel comfortable to keep coming back, keep engaging, and actually want to talk to us as the brand. Bring us into conversations of people are talking about, B2B marketing somewhere, and someone's just like, oh, well, Forrester deals with that. And I can kind of come in as the voice of the brand and the company and speak to that, not just here's a blog, but have a conversation or bring an analyst in. And that's not something that people are currently doing, because we've never created an environment where people were doing that. And it was always something that I assumed no one wanted to do. And I'm like, why would someone want to talk to a research brand? Like, we have so much research. Why would they talk to us? But after the last year, I'm like, they want to talk to someone. We can be that place where they're congregating and speaking to each other. So yeah, it's a huge learning curve. I'm uncomfortable every day because I'm like, I don't know if it's, I've been in this field long enough where I should kind of know and I don't. But that was the most reassuring thing with kind of finding my own personal marketing community on Twitter. I remember writing a tweet where I was like, does anyone know what they're doing right now? Because I'm guessing and I'm kind of afraid to tell my manager that. And it got so much engagement and everyone's like, I am the manager and I don't know. Like I'm the director and I don't know. And it was this moment of just like, okay, we're all guessing. So I don't have to be afraid to tell people that I'm just, and I would join meetings and I still join meetings. And I'm like, hey, this is what I'm trying. If you see other cool stuff, let me know. If you think it can be better, let me know. Like I'm
It's
not.
authentic.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's authentically you. And I think you're proving that you're building a voice for Forrester that is so authentic. And I know that resonates with me because like you said, you tweet something, and if I see that Claire is saying it or even Forrester is saying it, makes me be able to breathe, or in theme with our show, right? Full radically transparency here, being able to sleep better at night, like because you see that you're not alone. And I think as we were all in lockdown and we were all alone yet together but alone, when we would see these messages on social, knowing that nobody had it together, none of us social media managers quite knew what was gonna work. I think that was definitely something that was making my blood pressure go down when I would see others share a tweet as you share that kind of says, hey guys, I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm going to give it a try. With that, I wanted to jump into a question that I've been dying to ask you, and it has to do with failure because I think a lot of us social media managers, we're perfectionists, right? We come prepared. We like to understand through everything you shared, research, engage. We don't love to just put random stuff out on social media. But what I'm so curious to ask, I know failure is an inevitable part of success, and we can only learn from what flops, essentially, right? Could you share with us, sitting in the chair of a social media expert, social media manager at Forrester, perhaps a time this year that you thought, oh my goodness, this is a complete flop, I have failed. But actually, when you look back in retrospect, not the case at all.
The whole year. Pretty much post summit from June to like now. It's kind of refreshing to not know what's going on because I don't feel responsible for content that isn't performing what I didn't know how it was going to perform. So it's been really freeing actually, where before I felt really tuned in to my content and behavior, where I knew to expect certain behaviors out of the content that I was posting. I knew I would get certain leads and lead flow and kind of top of funnel engagement. And now it's like, I really don't know. I'm going to put this up because I think it's a good idea. I think it'll resonate. And if it doesn't resonate, I'm like, okay, so apparently it didn't resonate. I'm going to try this exact same thing tomorrow and see if it was the day. Nope, wasn't the day. Okay, let me try the time. Nope, wasn't the time. Okay, this doesn't work. And like, I'm just continually pushed to just see, because I'm almost relearning our audience. Yeah. I'm relearning how they want to engage with us. So I am putting out conversations and putting out talking points and engaging messaging, hoping that they'll want to engage with that. But I've had some posts where I get like 300 votes and some where I get 3. And I'm like, you know what? Those 3 people wanted to engage. They still did. It could have been 0. Yeah. And there have been some that have blown me out of the water. And I'm like, okay, people are really amped up about this topic. I'm going to keep doing this. But every single day is a surprise. And I feel like other folks, and especially in America, I don't schedule that far out because I don't trust the world enough for that.
I used to schedule months in advance, totally know what I was doing. And now not the case.
Yeah. I kind of log on to social, feel the vibe, see how content has been performing, and then kind of put out what I think might sound good or what content I think should be out there. And I'm still posting the blogs and podcasts and ebooks and stuff like that and webinars, but in a different way. I'm not just saying, hey, join this webinar. I'm using a poll and maybe threading it with the webinar, but I'm trying to really have engagement first and then lead them to that content. But sometimes that doesn't work and it gets like 1 like. I'm like, okay, I screenshot it and I put it in my didn't work pile and I revisit it when I'm revisiting content.
Isn't it
Um,
a little bit scary in our roles to think that it's like we don't exactly have control. So like if you go to, let's say, your strategy table and you're bringing to them like your didn't work pile and your worked pile, and they're like, "Oh, well, why did this work?" Like sometimes do you ever feel like you don't actually know, like you like maybe all your bets were on one piece of content like you said, and you're going to put it out and it gets 3 responses. And then one where you're kind of like, "Oh, maybe right before dinner you wanted to post one more out there and suddenly it like goes viral." How do you as a social media manager either build the story to prove ROI, or like how do you talk about that in a meeting? Because for me, I struggle sometimes because I want people to think that I do know what I'm doing to some extent, but I have to say sometimes I feel like I'm not driving the content bus, but the content bus is driving me. So kind of walk through that.
yeah, I think like, I mean, I'm very lucky where my team and my department and my company is very used to me being honest about like, I don't know why this worked. I don't know why this is working. This is my assumption based on the behavior that I know from our audience, the behavior I've seen around the content and kind of what's going on that day, the way they engaged, and my this is what I was going for with this piece of content. This is how they engaged. This is part of the strategy and what I'm trying to get out of it. They really like this piece of content. So that's why I usually like kind of turn it to them and say, why do you think this piece of content resonated? What about, is it about this analyst? Is it about this piece of research? The topic, is the topic really um, like a huge thing for this persona right now? Is this something that I should be doing more of? But it allows a conversation because we know our content, we know our buyer personas, we know we kind of know their needs, but there's other folks like the content team that knows the content really well, the portfolio marketing team that really knows the personas well, and other folks in marketing that have seen behaviors like from email and from paid that they can share. So I'm like, this is kind of my assumption based on my expertise and the behavior that we've seen and the behavior I expected. But is there something in here that kind of speaks to you that says, yes, that makes sense? Because that kind of takes some of the pressure off of you and makes it a conversation. And that also allows them to think, okay, is it a word that we think is resonating? Is it the way we phrase this question? Is this topic, oh yeah, this topic's hot. We've been getting really great, click-through rates on this in email. And then that's something that you can be like, great, what are other ways that we can talk about this type of question? How's the way that we can rephrase it? So then it becomes something that everyone's invested in. You don't feel as responsible for that one tweet. And then same thing when it doesn't do well. I'm like, hey guys, I really thought this was going to do well. I was really proud of that. I was really excited. I told people about it. And then it got like 2 votes and no likes. And I don't know why. Maybe it was time of day. Maybe people just didn't care that day, but do you have any thoughts? And I stopped feeling embarrassed about not knowing a while ago, because especially in B2B. And I'm sure you can even like resonate. Like, it's not as simple as people like this lipstick, we're going to keep posting it. It's executives with busy lives, and we're trying to be a piece of that. Mm-hmm. So it could just be a flop, but it could also be that in that tweet, we weren't using the right language. We were using something that maybe I assumed folks know, but they don't. But I go into every meeting just always prefacing like, I don't actually know if this is true, but this is what I'm going with, because I don't, no one's actually telling me why they didn't like it. I have to assume based on the lack of engagement why they didn't.
I only laugh because I relate 100%.
And I'm really thankful that it's something that my team isn't, I don't get punished for it. They're like, okay, great. That's not like, let's have a conversation about this, or let's explore this. And I've kind of done the same thing with, I do a lot of employee advocacy and enablement. I've done the same thing with the sales folks. So they're like, why did this particular post do well? I'm like, I don't know, but cherish that. Try to do it again. If it doesn't work again, that's fine. That. Be excited that this piece of content worked. And in this moment, people wanted to hear from you. Cherish that. Put that in like a rainy day folder when you really need it. And just continue to kind of work on that and try to create that engagement again.
Claire, I wish we literally had the whole day. Because just first of all, listening to you speak about social makes me so calm that I'm not alone. And second, I think you really just say it as it is, and I appreciate that so much. to have an authentic social media voice on behalf of somebody writing, content and really trying to analyze and coming to the table saying, I'm not sure. I wish we had the whole day to chat. We definitely have to have you back because I'm sure there's a lot more conversation to be had. But to be true to the time slot that we have and the listeners that are popping in, I want to ask you one final question. And that question is putting our social media manager hats aside and our professional lives to the side for a moment. Can you share with us one thing about yourself that we cannot learn from your LinkedIn profile or anywhere on social media?
Yeah, so I was actually like really up at night trying to think of something because I've made it a point in my brand and in general to be really honest about everything. I talk about my mental illnesses. I've talked about past trauma. I've talked about really every emotion that I felt on LinkedIn or Twitter in some way. Because I've always wanted my brand to be a safe space for folks to feel like, oh, I don't want to tell anyone that I have anxiety, but I feel safe on Claire's profile where she talks about her anxiety and I can feel seen. So I really had to like ask even some friends and be like, what's something that you can't find even on my Twitter where I like complain all the time? And they were like, Claire, you just moved cross country to Austin. Like, I don't think you've talked about that yet. I'm like, true. So that's something that may be on Twitter, but it's definitely not on LinkedIn. I updated my like location, but a couple of weeks ago, I drove from Connecticut to Texas. And moved into a very empty apartment. I have some plants. I have a bed frame and I have 2 chairs.
I love it.
So that's what I'm working out of right now. But it's felt really, really refreshing to just kind of pick up, go, start over. It's kind of, I feel like it's really like almost like a theme for me right now of just like, all right, we'll see how that works. We'll show up to the apartment we haven't seen in person and we'll hope it's great.
I love it. I mean, keeping with the theme of 2020, I think it taught us well. If any of us are ever in Austin, we'll be sure to ping you over on LinkedIn
yes,
and
definitely.
for an in-person coffee, hopefully when COVID starts to settle down a bit. And final question, I know that after this show, people just love our guests and love to get more information. Where is the best way to reach you or connect with you should anybody listening in have some questions or just want to follow you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is great. I usually like connecting with people there and then moving to Twitter if we want to get more like salty. And then I also have a website, which is just claireakennedy.com. And that's if anyone wants to reach out I do a lot of personal branding training and social media help. So on the side, if anyone wants to do that.
Okay.
But yeah, I love connecting with folks. I love having, radically transparent conversations with them. Especially talking to other social media managers. I love to just have our little commune of just safety.
Love it. Claire, thank you so much for your time today for a fantastic conversation. And we look forward to not only being and hearing from Forrester as a megaphone, but really engaging with your community and being part of your tribe. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.